Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Chef has been our sponsor for the podcast from ChefConf here in Austin, Texas. Learn more about Habitat, Inspec, and Chef's focus on continuous automation at chef.io. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at ChefConf in Austin, Texas. I'm here with Graham Weldon of Rakuten. Hey, Graham.
Hi, nice to be here.
And Ken Cheney, CMO at Chef.
Yeah.
How are
Alex, you? I'm doing well.
Awesome.
Really nice to be here to talk about what's going on here.
Yeah, let's start with like the themes for the show. Continuous automation. Tell us why you guys are talking about that. What is it about this theme around continuous automation that makes so much sense for Chef to talk about? Then Graham, I'd like to kind of talk about your guys' process in thinking about continuous automation. So perhaps you could just give us that 10,000 foot look.
Okay, 10,000 foot level on continuous automation. Organizations these days need to move at agility. And the fact is like when you unpack what agility means, it means that you have to address a few areas to actually be able to move quickly. And if you don't, you're going to end up with roadblocks to your business.
Right.
Okay, and the realization is that automation is really the only way to get there.
Right.
At the scale, complexity, speed organizations need to move at, you must automate. You must automate at scale. And so when you unpack that, it means, from our perspective, you have to look across a few different vectors. You got to think about what you're doing from a speed perspective, and there's plenty of things you can do from a process level, people perspective, as well as technology perspective to move fast. But these days, you also have to be obviously like cost conscious and aware of efficiencies. And then importantly, one of the biggest roadblocks out there is around risk, which breaks down to compliance and security risk, whether it's meeting internal policies or responding to external threats like the WannaCry or Heartbleed, or regulatory requirements that are coming at you like PCI, HIPAA, other standards. And so organizations must figure out how to be able to move quickly. And the reality is that organizations that have figured this out are beginning to very clearly pull away from competitors in terms of profit margins, in terms of revenues, while others who haven't, or kind of incumbent players, are beginning to see the impact to their business because they haven't made these changes to move quick.
So you talk about speed, you talk about cost, you talk about risk, right?
Yep.
And speed seems to be so paramount now with the way that the market moves, the way open source projects move. Graham, what are your guys' challenges at Rakuten? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the company and how you think about speed, those factors that go with continuous automation.
Okay, so Rakuten's a Japanese company with some global companies around the world. We're primarily e-commerce, but branching into fintech and a bunch of other different things. One of our core principles for success, handed down by our CEO, is speed, speed, speed. So this is very relevant to us, and more recently has become quality, quality, quality. And often it's a trade-off between speed and quality. Depending on how you approach it, you either move fast and lose a little bit of quality, or you go focus on quality 100% and you start to operate a little bit slower. But with the tools and with the help that Chef provides, we're able to achieve both at a very good level. So we need to move fast, even though we're a large business. And when we do move fast, we're doing it for a couple of different reasons, different motivations for needing that speed. One is that in the case of a disaster recovery or scaling out, we need to be able to deploy systems extremely fast to meet customer demand. The other thing that we're doing is automating and trying to reach that speed because we have very intelligent resources and people in the company that we're now able to free up to do much more interesting and innovative things now that we're starting to automate much more of the systems.
What are you travel a lot. We were talking about this earlier, and I think on stage you said 250 days of the year you're on the road.
Yeah, last year.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, what are the stories you're hearing from companies about these issues around continuous automation? What are their roadblocks? What are they facing as challenges now?
Well, I think most organizations, what they're trying to get to is a point where they free up developers from having to think about infrastructure. And that's been kind of a core principle at Chef for a long time, right? And to get there, you have to actually get through the knotholes on these issues around how to bring all of the right people to the table. And so in many organizations, they may be doing DevOps for pipelines, but they end up with this roadblock at some point in the pipeline where they have to go through a security review, right? And that security review could take hours, days, weeks, depending on the organization, right? So you see organizations where they have obstacles there.
Right.
You see organizations where you may have application teams that are moving quickly themselves, but the underlying infrastructure teams still move very slowly.
Right.
So I often see organizations, I call it an above the waterline, below the waterline problem, where you see below the waterline these infrastructure teams that are moving more slowly. They will take forever to provision a VM, provide an IP, provide the DNS. So the application teams will respond by over requesting, over provisioning, right? Just so they have that pool of infrastructure available to them. You'll see organizations where they just have a backlog in moving ideas. And I think this becomes a fundamental business problem. When you look at like an Amazon who can push ideas so fast, right? And when you can push ideas fast, it means that you can succeed or fail on those ideas really quickly.
Right, really quickly.
And so these organizations that move slow, they fall behind their competitors. And this is a very much what's happening, right? These slow-moving organizations at the end of the day are falling behind their competitors slowly over time, while the competitors clearly out-innovate them and learn quickly based on market feedback.
So Graham, tell us about some of the technical challenges you've had with, proceeding to this place where you can really be as fast as your CEO is wanting you to be fast with that high level of quality that your CEO is expecting as well. Because when I've talked to companies like Capital One, they had to rethink their whole API lifecycle management process, right? They had to think about this legacy middleware that they had, right?
Right. So with such a large and diverse company, we have lots of legacy projects, but a lot of new projects coming along at the same time. So the push has been towards microservices and provisioning those in contained environments more recently. But we definitely have 5-year-old projects that are still operating businesses to today. One of the issues we have is trying to maintain all of that on a common infrastructure and a sane base on which we can operate successfully and comfortably in production. The tools around that are one piece of the problem, and we're able to move much faster. And like Ken was saying, the speed allows you to succeed, get ahead of your competitors. But at an engineer level, it allows you to fail much faster, which is super important. What we're able to do for those legacy applications that we need to maintain and bring forward is test those and try those on new systems that we're deploying, bring them into more modern environments, but while we're doing that, fail many times and learn from the process, and fail fast and get good results as a result of that process.
So how have you guys been using Chef? Are you using Habitat?
We have started using Habitat. There's quite a good spread of Chef through the company. We have 50,000 nodes that were managed by Chef. That's including the physical, bare metal, virtual machines and whatnot. We've started using Habitat as a proof of concept that we've tested in our staging environment for particular projects, and we're ready for production.
Why are you using it? Why did you decide to use Habitat?
Habitat allows us to change our deployment environment without thinking too much about it. And I like to say that I'm successful at doing what I do because I'm a lazy person. I don't want to think too much about when I'm transitioning from one environment to another. Habitat allows us to maintain the current deployment environment for legacy applications, but also attempt, trial, and test pushing those same things into containers. And it also allows us to offload a lot of the operations onto developers and help them understand the full stack that they're deploying.
That has some efficiencies in itself, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. And it provides benefits that I keep saying that Chef is solving problems that we don't know we have. Once I see these solutions come through, I can't live without them.
Interesting. So how does the compliance story fit into this? And I mean, you do talk about how you said like you do hear from people when you're out on the road, they're talking about security issues, but why have you chosen compliance? Is that just the theme you hear over and over again from customers, and what are you hearing specifically?
No, I mean it's something that we've been investing in from a product perspective pretty heavily, right? So it's not just something that we're speaking to because it's the topic of the day. It's something that we actually really believe we can.
Well, I wasn't thinking about it as the topic of the day. I was thinking of it more like as real customer pain points.
Oh yeah. It's a very, very much a real customer pain point where we saw the opportunity to take a different approach to compliance. Where most organizations, when we walked in and talked to them, I spent a lot of time looking at how customers were approaching compliance, and most of them viewed compliance as an afterthought. They were scraping logs, manually creating reports to prove back to auditors that they were in compliance. And if you think about the type of exposure you could have for non-compliant systems these days, it's pretty extreme. And we looked at the problem, we realized, you know what, we could shift risk much to the left if we could actually help developers be able to treat compliance as a software test.
Yes.
Right? And so taking these like large 3-ring binders that organizations have with all of their compliance policy and security policy and codifying it, right? In a very real way, like in a way of, for instance, you configure a system, you then want to interrogate that system to make sure it's running the right version of SSL, for instance, that conforms to your policy. That's an example of a software test that we can run that can be run not just as a moment in time kind of afterthought, but it can run every time a software code change is made, so that you know you are always continuously compliant.
Right.
And that we saw was like a very much something that we could bring to market that would fundamentally change how organizations approach security and compliance in a way that they just weren't doing today.
So Graham, in terms of compliance and security, what are the roadblocks that you face when you're thinking about microservices, for example, and containerized applications and workloads?
So containers are extremely flexible, extremely composable, and in that it brings a potential security risk. We need to, as a corporation, mandate that certain packages be used, certain rules are followed, and that security agrees to the deployment and production environment. The concept of continuous automation for security is one that allows people to be aware right at the moment as they're developing things of any potential issues that the sooner you find out, the less time it takes to fix. And if you're building a big project and you assess it after the fact, just before you're going to ship, it often takes a long time to take into consideration all the changes that need to be made to make that now compliant.
We definitely see, like in the container ecosystem, the opaqueness of the container from an operations perspective as being an issue, right? That application developer packages that container, throws it over the fence, and for the operator, they often don't know the dependencies that are in that container. And that was one of the key kind of value props we saw with Habitat that we could bring to the table, was allowing you to understand all of the dependencies that are in that container. So easily through an API, introspect into that container, be able to see all of those dependencies, and also be able to see the transitive dependencies. For instance, if you used a version of Go for the build that happens to have a bug in it, you can actually introspect in and see, okay, what versions of my containers, or what containers out there are running in my fleet that have that bad build version in them. Is
that the major hurdle then, those dependencies inside the container, or what does it encompass in terms of the challenges for you at Rakuten?
In particular in containers, yes, the understanding the dependencies and making that transparent and discoverable is a big challenge. this idea of throwing a container over the fence in terms of environments, from a developer environment to staging to production, it's so easy with a technology such as Docker or any container technology that certain things such as security can be overlooked, or they become different and difficult to inspect. If you've got a process in place to manage that throughout the life cycle, you become much safer. You get real-time reporting on what may be an issue.
So have you started looking at introspect or inspect? I mean,
we are using inspect,
Yeah.
but we're using it not as much as I would like right now. It takes some time to bring people across and agree to use these particular tools.
explain to us how you're using it, how you're using inspect.
So there's some basic compliance checks that we, as non-security people specifically, can implement, CIS benchmarks and so forth, that allow us to ensure a greater hardening of the systems that we deploy. That's something that there are existing policies out there that we can use and build on ourselves to add our own corporate policies to the top of that, and understand those the results of that in our deployment environment straight away. So we're slowly phasing that in on certain projects. And we take this approach of showing people what we're capable of doing, and more people will jump on board as they see the amazing things that it can do.
Is inspect a container security environment in some respects too? It's mostly just for compliance, really.
Well, it's the fact is with inspec you can write a rule, and that rule can be a compliance rule. It
Right.
can be a security rule.
Right.
Like, so the CIS benchmarks cover
Right.
a lot of security vulnerabilities, right? And so, you essentially can see scenarios where, like, say the next Heartbleed happens, you could write the rule to check probably that SSL vulnerability or whatever it happens to be, and easily interrogate all your systems, and then put in place a software test to make sure that you never again introduce that known vulnerability into your environments. So I'd answer that it's both compliance and a security.
Yeah, I think of like if there's a lot of new container security tools out there.
Oh,
Is
there
there an intersection with inspect and other third-party tools that you guys are seeing?
Well, I think there's a lot of people trying to basically remove that opaqueness with containers, right? And then do the job. So there's one, removing that opaqueness, so understanding what's in that container,
Right.
and then two, once you do that, some mechanism of understanding what those dependencies are and what the risks are around those dependencies. And so I look at it as inspect plus habitat go hand in hand. So inspect can query directly against the Docker APIs. I think Docker themselves has inspect in one of their Git repos and some support there. So it can be used that way as well. So there's value on both fronts with inspect and habitat.
So Graham, in terms of, I'll pose this question to you similarly. Is it inspect a platform that you see intersecting with other container security technologies? Are you using other container security technologies? Are you not at that point? Where are you with things?
We're not at that point. We're starting to migrate towards containers, and there's a company-wide mandate to ensure that we push forward towards using containers more. We have certain systems and mechanisms in place to inspect certain security and make sure we're compliant at certain levels. I don't think it overlaps a lot. I think the flexibility of the tool means it will overlap with a lot of things, but it's not a direct competitor yeah.
Yeah, I'm just there's that. I think there's just a lot of. This is the time in the market where people are just trying a lot of different things, right? And I'm trying to see what actually makes sense.
And there's a Cambrian explosion of tooling out there.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll have to wait and see the patterns that people end up adopting, for sure. And I think that's one of the things what we think about is that you can get really caught up in a given technology and caught up in that ecosystem, and we embrace. It's why we have such a heterogeneous strategy, right? We think very much about, hey, trying to meet customers where they are today with their current environments, like Rakuten and their large fleets of VMs that they run, managed with Chef, but also the various technologies that people are looking at, whether it's a Kubernetes or a Mesosphere or Azure Stack or any of these newer technologies that are emerging that people are using how do we make sure that we can provide this common way of managing across them all?
Right, right, right. I mean, I'm curious from your perspective, Graham. How do you keep track of just the richness of the tooling ecosystem now?
That's a really difficult question. There's
No.
there's so many tools out there that provide certain features that we will look into. There's some things that we use internally that we'll tend to stick with. When we look at a new tool such as Habitat, something really needs to provide a new tool needs to provide a lot of benefit and a low entry point. And it needs to be consistent and capable of being used in all the environments we deploy to. Most of the time when I look at a tool, I spend 30 minutes. I'll look at it. I'll see how it's going, whether or not I can use it, and that's my assessment time.
Yeah.
And in the case of Habitat specifically, it took 10 minutes. Right?
Yeah.
It looks. I said this before. It looks scary from the outside, but when you spend a little bit of time with it, 10 minutes, and you just understand that I never knew that I needed this, but now I need this everywhere. It's just so flexible.
So what are you looking for from Habitat going forward? You've had a chance to look at it. You've had a chance to try it. You've done some experimenting with Inspec. What are some of those things that you're looking for so you can scale something like Habitat and scale something like Inspec?
So scaling is actually an interesting point on Habitat and how it works. They have health check capability to define the health of a service, and that's great. We can use that information to scale up or down based on the health of a service. What I've been talking to people about today is potential upcoming features for Habitat, and what could be coming is performance endpoints, so that we could programmatically or based on hooks act on the performance of a particular application. So with the case of a health check, you can scale based on failure or success of a node, but with the addition of a performance endpoint, you could scale based on the load of an application. So you can have that start to auto scale based on the traffic you're receiving, which is a capability that a lot of platform as a service options don't provide, but something very easy to add to Habitat.
Performance, then, is that something that you guys are looking at then in terms of how you can scale something, be able to kind of start manage those endpoints and those different, because one of the complexities about containers is just the number of components, right? And in microservices environments, you can have any kinds of components.
It's one of the advantages of the approach where the application manages itself, right? These because the automation travels with the application,
right,
and it's managed at that node level.
Right.
The supervisor is managing
Right.
that application node, and it's all API driven. So we're exposing health, right? We're exposing the manageability. We have a lot of capability that we can exploit that we are just now getting started with, right? And so we are seeing this strong interest from the community on a number of fronts to add things like performance capabilities and improve the depth that we're having in terms of making it easier for devs to get started and write the right kind of hooks that they need.
I like the philosophical discussion that you guys had this morning about looking at the rock and roll band like Roots. We'll hit like a band like Roots, right?
Yeah.
And like how the band, you go there, you expect to see a show and you know the band, right? But you expect that, but with a band like that, they may change things out, right?
That's right.
They might have a tuba player in one show, right? And I'm curious on the importance of that for a company like Rakuten, to be able to have that, because one of the challenges you have in this new space is, for instance, these new tooling are starting to and the infrastructure is becoming so incredibly complex that you're going to need ways to almost change the underlying foundation at points, right? Because you're going to want to be able to adapt it, and being able to then adapt to vulnerabilities or changes in your workflows and stuff.
And so one of the things that Chef has taught us, and I'm talking Chef the company, not the tool, is that aligning groups or teams with business objectives allows you to provide a certain abstraction over how things are happening behind the scenes. What we really should be tracking and how we track performance of any team working for the company is, are you achieving the objectives that are set out for you?
Right.
At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're deploying things onto bare metal or a VM or into Docker containers or how you're orchestrating it, but is that deployment that you've done meeting the objectives of the company?
Right.
That's the important piece.
Right. That must be something always on your mind when you're thinking about how do you tell the story about continuous automation, kind of in context with just such a rapid innovation that we see in this market.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Where we see failure is in organizations that get so caught up in the technology choices and forget about the fact that they're really working for an overall mission or business objective.
Yeah.
Right, and if they keep that kind of business objective in mind and what the outcome they're trying to drive and align to that, much better results.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for taking some time. Graham, nice to meet you here, and Ken, thanks for having us at the show, and good luck, and we look forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, Alex.
Thanks very much.
Enjoyed the time.
Chef has been our sponsor for the podcast from ChefConf here in Austin, Texas. Learn more about Habitat, Inspec, and Chef's focus on continuous automation at chef.io. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Bakers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.